When we build an application, we need to store information about our users and the roles that our users have or their authorities. Often a database is a great candidate to store this information because developers are so familiar with writing SQL and extracting information from a database. We have seen several examples throughout the course of how we can leverage Spring Security to query some custom user tables within our application. Now we're going to take a step back and look at how we can use a standardized schema that is provided by Spring Security. So if we adhere to a particular database structure to store our user and authority information, we can then leverage some of the out-of-the-box features of Spring Security that just really integrate very nicely with that table structure and make configuring our authentication very easy. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn to the Spring Security reference or the documentation. We're going to see there is a JDBC DAO impl. And this allows us to connect to a predefined schema within our database. Within this write-up in the documentation, you're going to see a link for the database schema appendix. And if you click on that link, it's going to take you to the recommended table structure that will allow you to integrate seamlessly with the Spring Security JDBC user service. We're going to copy this SQL snippet, and then we're going to navigate to our init.sql file. So this script gets executed every time we start our application. So we're going to add these tables into our SQL script so that they are built. So there we have the create users table and the create authorities table statements. And you can see they're adding an index as well as a constraint between these two tables. So it's pretty simple. 3 columns within the users table. One says, what's the username, what's the password, and then there's this enabled column, which is a Boolean. In the authorities table, we have a foreign key to the username in the user table, and then we have the authority column, which is going to store things like, role underscore admin, role underscore user. So we're specifying the particular authorities for a given user. I'm going to add a statement here to drop these tables once we run our script. That way we are sure that they get cleared out. So just drop table, then the table name, and then if exists. And I'm actually going to add these to the top of our configuration. And now what we're going to do is we're going to write insert statements in order to put some users into these tables when we start our application so that we can test with them. So insert into users, and then username, password, enabled, and then we're going to supply some values. So the username, we're just going to go with end user for new user, a password of password, and then for the enabled field, we're just going to supply a 1, which will equate to a true. Now we need to enter some authorities for this user. And in the authorities table, we have the username column and we have the authority column. We're going to provide some values there. The username will be end user. So we complete that foreign key relationship. And then we're going to specify that this is an admin user. And then we add our semicolon at the end. So here we have made changes to our database. Now, obviously, this is a temporary database that gets launched with the application every time and then clears out. But these insert statements will execute and load this data for when we start our application. And at this point, we will only have one user registered in that default schema we're going to use. Now that we have modified our SQL and our database to be able to store this information, now we need to navigate to our security context.xml file, and we're going to specify a different type of user service. So you can see that we reverted back to our in-memory user service. We're just going to remove that. we're going to leverage another tag within the security namespace, and that tag is the JDBC user service. And it asks us to specify a value for the data source ref attribute. You need to establish a data source bean within your application context.xml file. So here I'm using the JDBC namespace, and we are setting up a connection to our H2 database. And I gave that bean an ID of data source, and I'm just going to specify that bean reference within this configuration file. So at this point, that is everything. You can see if that database were in place and that structure were in place, it would be simply adding this one line and we would be ready to go. So let's restart our server and we'll just run through and try to log in with the end user just to test out our configuration. And at that point, we log into the application using Spring's standard schema for users and authorities. And we're going to see how we can expand upon this to increase the robustness of our authentication and access control within Spring Security.